Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the White House Equal Pay Day Summit. My name is Jennifer Klein, and I'm the director of the White House Gender Policy Council. Thank you to all of you who've joined us here today, and thank you to all of you who are tuning in for this important conversation. To get us started, I'm thrilled to introduce a longtime leader in advocating for equal pay as California's Attorney General, as United States Senator, and now as Vice President. Welcome, Vice President Harris.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. And Jen Klein, thank you for the introduction and mostly for the work that you do every day tirelessly as the director of our Gender Policy Council. And to the members of Congress, members of our administration, business leaders, community leaders, and equal pay advocates who are here with us virtually and in person, thank you for your leadership, for your partnership, and for your commitment to action every day. So I'll begin with a simple truth. Our economy just has not been working as it should for the women of our nation. Across industries, women are less likely to be hired than equally qualified men. They are paid less and promoted slower for doing similar work. Women are routinely shut out of good jobs in high-paying industries, such as science and technology, construction and truck driving, in part because our society tells women that some industries are just not for them. And as study after study has shown, women are expected to shoulder an unequal share of unpaid caregiving responsibilities. When families cannot afford or cannot find caregiving, such as childcare, elder care, or home care, it often falls on women to fill the gaps, whether that means going part-time or leaving the workforce entirely, or working full-time at a paid job and full-time performing unpaid caregiving. And over the past 2 years, the pandemic has only deepened these inequities as caregiving has become more expensive and more difficult to find. And here's how it all adds up. Today, on average, working women who are working full-time, year-round, make just 83 cents for every dollar that a man makes. And for many women of color, the gap is even wider. Over a 40-year career, a woman will lose out on about $400,000. For Black women, Latina women, Native American women, that loss in wages is closer to $1 million. And of course, that is money that a woman could use to pay off her student loan debt, or put a down payment on a house, or pay a mortgage, or invest in a small business, or save for retirement. As one must recognize, lower wages mean working women have less money to save today, and lower wages mean they receive lower Social Security benefits in their senior years. For so many women, the gender wage gap acts as a virtual tax, making it so much more difficult to pay the bills and invest in their future. It can also have a negative impact on their productivity, job satisfaction, and retention. And by extension, it can have a negative impact on individual businesses and on our economy as a whole. As the business leaders here today will tell us, closing the gender wage gap, well, it's not just a moral issue, it's also a business one. If we are going to continue to grow our economy and to be competitive and lead the world in the 21st century, we simply cannot afford to leave half of our workforce behind. To build an economy that works for all of us, we must build an economy that works for women. That is one of our administration's central missions, and that has been a central mission of mine for quite some time. In fact, when I served in the United States Senate, I introduced what we named the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights Act to ensure that domestic workers, 90% of whom are women, they are paid fairly and that their rights are protected. And with Senator Patty Murray of Washington and Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, I co-sponsored the Paycheck Fairness Act to make it easier for employees to bring equal pay claims against their employers. And over the past year, our administration has taken important action to address the gender wage gap. We passed the American Rescue Plan, which provided immediate relief to millions of women who were severely impacted by the pandemic. We passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is creating good-paying, good union jobs, including for many women in industries where they are underrepresented, such as transportation, clean energy, and construction. Today, we are taking additional steps to help increase pay equity across our nation. One factor that contributes to pay inequity is the common practice of requiring job applicants to share their salary history. Now think about that. Why does that matter? Well, in effect, it's allowing how much an employee was paid in the past to impact how much they will be paid in the future. So think about that. For many women, this practice can mean that inequitable pay from a previous job will follow them to the current job, and so on and so on. So our administration is committed to eliminating discriminatory pay practices that inhibit the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of the federal government. And that's why today our Office of Personnel Management will begin work to address the use of salary history in the hiring and pay-setting process for federal employees. And today, the President, Joe Biden, will sign an executive order that directs the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council to consider limiting the use of salary history in employment decisions by federal contractors. In addition, today, our Department of Labor will direct federal contractors to strengthen pay audits. Pay audits help organizations determine whether they are paying all their employees equitably, and if they are not, give them data to help correct that inequity. The President and I firmly believe that all companies should conduct these audits, and where appropriate, should be transparent about the results. By the way, I think it's always appropriate to be transparent about the results, because pay transparency creates accountability. And accountability, well, that drives progress. Our administration cannot bridge the wage gap alone. It will truly take all of us working together. And that is why we are gathered here today at this summit. We can build a more fair, more efficient, and more equitable economy. As I said and truly believe, an economy that works for women and for everyone. That's how it goes. An economy that works for women works for everyone. And so together we will continue to do this good work. I thank you all the leaders who are here, and let us continue with this important work until we truly reach a place where all workers and all people are treated fairly. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank everyone here today who is sharing your experience. It's a true honor to be at this event. I want to give a special shout out to our incredible Vice President, Kamala Harris. She's certainly an inspiration to all women, young women all over this country. I'll tell you a quick story. We were on a trip last week, and there was a young woman, 10-year-old young girl, sitting in the front row. And when the Vice President got on the stage, her eyes lit up. And afterwards, I went over to her and I said, "How you doing?" She said, "I'm good." And she said to me, "I want to meet the Vice President." I said, "Don't worry, we're going to make it happen." And she is an inspiration for young girls all across America, young women all across America, for women all across America, all across this country. So I want to thank you, Madam Vice President. I also want to thank Jennifer Klein for her great work. I know Jennifer's running around here organizing. Thank you, Jennifer, for the amazing work you do. And it would be remiss not to give a shout out to some of the members of the U.S. national soccer players that are here with us today. You are an inspiration on the field. You make our country proud. But more importantly, you have been a huge inspiration off the field, fighting for equality for women all across this country and all across this globe. So I want to thank you for what you do and who you're standing up for. Truly are an inspiration. I also just want to, my parents were immigrants from Ireland. My mother came to America from Ireland when she was 17 years old. She came here to do domestic. She came actually to make some money to send back home. She did domestic work. I owe so much to her, to my mom, who I am today. And I think about how hard she worked when we talk about these issues. When I talk about women and women of color and immigrants, I think of my mother because she was an immigrant and she came here at a very young age and had nothing. She had her aunt was here, and I think about making sure that in my role, whether it's my role as Secretary of Labor right now, my previous role as Mayor of Boston, or my role before that as a union person or a state legislator, it's important for us to keep the fight up. In my role today, Secretary of Labor at the Department of Labor, I'm very honored and lucky to have so many dedicated people working with me every day, and we're committed to gender equity. That work is led by our Women's Bureau, and our commitment to equity shapes everything that we do. So Equal Pay Day is an important day for us. It's not only a measure of the gender pay gap, it's a measure of the work we must do to close the gap. I was at an event earlier today with Speaker Pelosi, and she was saying before she got on the stage, how wonderful it would be if she didn't have to do these events anymore. That if you can imagine women actually get paid the same as men, it would really be earth-shattering, something like that, she said. And she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right in what her words were. For too long, our economy has rested too much on unpaid or underpaid women. Let women do the work in our country, especially women of color. And that's not right. It's not good for our country, and it has to change, and it's time to change. Today, we published a report, the Department of Labor, the Women's Bureau, we published a report. It's called Bearing the Cost, How Overrepresentation is Undervalued, Roles Hurt Women During the Pandemic. It's not just about the pandemic, but it's about low pay. It's about limited opportunities that left women vulnerable during the pandemic. And obviously, we can look at this report and go back 200 years and pretty much come to the same conclusion, and continue to leave women vulnerable, especially women of color. This injustice has been created over many decades in our country. But thanks to the leadership today of the President and the Vice President, we're addressing this issue head on and right now. We're building a historic worker-centered recovery, and we're determined to use this moment to provide women the opportunity, the wages, and the equality and equity that they deserve. At the Department of Labor this year, we launched the Good Jobs Initiative. It's something that we created. This goal is to improve job quality and job equity across the economy and also across all of our different departments here in the federal government. It means opening up good jobs to all workers, so that investing in career pathways for women, like apprenticeships that lead to good jobs, good union jobs, union infrastructure jobs that we're creating right now here in the United States. It means creating good jobs in every industry, whether you work in childcare, retail, restaurants, teaching, or professional soccer players. You deserve fair wages, paid leave, and access to childcare, safety, respect, and dignity in your job. We can start with the workers here in the federal government who work for our federal government. Last year, the president raised the minimum wage for federal contractors to $15 an hour. It might sound crazy that we had workers working for the federal government that were being paid $6 and $7, $8 an hour. We have implemented that order. We have raised overpay for over 300,000 workers who are disproportionately women and people of color. In addition, today, our Office of Federal Contract Compliance Program issued a directive to strengthen pay equity audits conducted by federal contractors. What that means is when the contracts go out, we look at the audits to see if the contracts actually made it to the pockets they're supposed to and do the backup we're supposed to have. We're also proud to play a role in pay equity and pay transparency executive order the Vice President announced a few minutes ago. Ultimately, our goal is and needs to empower women in the economy. One of the most proven ways to get power is to join a union. And that's how I got my opportunity along with millions of others. I also spoke this morning over at the Capitol Hill, and we had a woman who was a sheet metal worker for 25 years, and she stood at the podium. She talked about working in the field. And she gets paid exactly the same as her male counterpart doing exactly the same work, because the collective bargaining agreement says that. The bargaining agreement doesn't say, well, men get paid more than women. It says everyone gets paid equally across the board. And I had that opportunity to see it up close in person. And the fact is that women and workers of color in unions earn better and more equal wages than their non-union counterparts. The pay gaps are smaller, and the workplace are safer, with less discrimination, harassment. And we still have work to do there, too. I'm not saying we don't have work to do there. We absolutely do. I am honored to serve with the Vice President as her Vice Chair of the White House Task Force on Worker Empowerment and Organizing. We want to make sure that all workers know they have the right to join the union. When I think about the impacts you can have, when I think about the impacts you ladies had, I think about workers like I met Leslie Cotton in Portland, Oregon. Leslie was living with her elderly dad, helping care for her disabled brother. I met her at an event when I was in Oregon a few months ago, and she was barely getting by in her low-income job, and she talked about it. She found a better opportunity in a pre-apprentice program, which is called Oregon Tradeswomen. And this is a tradeswoman group into the building trades that allowed Leslie the chance to get into the building trades and funded in partnership with the Department of Labor. She's now a union plumber in a middle-class job with good wages, good health, and a future pension. That's what we need to strive for. That's what we need to continue to fight for every single day. The bottom line is this administration doesn't just talk about gender equity and equal pay. You can see it in the policies that the president and vice president rolled out. You can see it in the infrastructure law. You can see it in the bills that we filed. You can see it in the executive orders they're filed. You can see it all across the agency. You can see it when the president and vice president have us all and his cabinet members in a meeting demanding to us that we do this work, that we carry this work out. We have to finish the job. We can't talk about it anymore. The talking is done. We are taking action every single day to advance fairness and justice in our economy, and will not stop fighting until the pay gap is closed. Equal Pay Day is January 1st every single year. It is March 15th, 2022. At some point, we need to stop having these conversations, and people need to react to the stories you're hearing. So again, thank you very much. And again, to the soccer team, you guys are awesome. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Ahuja, Director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Income inequality impacts every woman and every family, and also has a larger economic cost to our country. But closing the pay gap is more than just economic progress or fairness. It's a moral imperative. These gaps are an affront to our values as a nation and go against the notion that every worker's contribution to this country's social and economic progress is equally valued, no matter their gender or background. I speak from personal experience, leading an Asian American women's organization that fought for equal pay for Asian American and Pacific Islander women, many of whom, especially Southeast Asian, Filipino, and Pacific Islander, are concentrated in domestic and caregiver roles. The federal government can and must lead by example and be a model employer. The gender pay gap for federal employees is just below 6% and shrinking, compared to 17% nationwide. Any gap is unacceptable, but we're headed in the right direction. For the second straight year, there is no gender pay gap in the government's senior executive service, the most senior career positions in government. We are proud of that fact, and we are driven to make progress in other key ways. For instance, by increasing the number of women SES overall from 38%, and ensuring the program truly draws from the full diversity of the American people. In fact, in 2021, more than half of individuals hired into our senior executive service were women, so we're on the right track. The federal pay system is more transparent than other systems and includes more information in its job announcements, like salary ranges. It also has narrower, defined pay ranges for starting salaries. All of these factors advance pay equity and transparency. We know there is still more work to be done. The federal pay gap has been built up over decades, and it will take time to eliminate. OPM is proud to work with our partners across the Biden-Harris administration to advance equity and close the pay gap once and for all. We're collaborating with agencies to evaluate HR practices. We're implementing pay discrimination prevention tools in line with President Biden's executive order to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce. And in the coming year, we're planning to propose changes to our regulations that address the use of prior salary history in the hiring and pay setting process. I'm humbled to have my own place in this progress as the first Asian American woman, the first South Asian woman to lead OPM. And I'm proud to stand with you all today as we forge a path for more female leaders to rise and receive every dime they earn in the workplace.
Hello, my name is Aileen Rizzo, and I'm from Fresno, California. Like our amazing First Lady, Joe Biden, education is close to my heart. Teaching is my passion. I've been working in mathematics education for 25 years at all levels, from preschool to the university. As the first in my family to go to college, education for me was a dream come true. In 2012, 16 years into my career, I was a math consultant for the County Office of Education. I found out about pay disparity with a newly hired male that amounted to approximately $13,000. I had more experience, more education, and more seniority than the new hire. So I went to Human Resources and was informed that my salary was based exclusively on prior pay. When I asked the HR administrator about the logic in this, she said, "It's the way we've always done it." When I came home after my meeting, my daughters ran into my arms like they did every day. And it dawned on me for the first time that one day they would enter the workforce. How would the workplace treat them if I did nothing? What the county office deemed as a neutral policy made the wrong assumption. It assumed that we all come from equal paths and have equal histories and equal standing. However, if you can pay a woman less because she's making less, then you perpetuate a wage gap far into the future. So I filed a lawsuit that began a journey I could not even imagine. But I also became an advocate. My family and I traveled a 3-hour trip about a dozen times so that I could testify before the California legislature and could lobby for stronger equal pay laws. When my youngest was 9 months old, I held her on stage at the Rosie Riveter Museum as the governor signed one of the strongest equal pay laws in the nation. And after 8 long years of navigating the court system and sacrificing both financially and emotionally, on July 2nd, 2020, the US Supreme Court declined to hear a challenge to the Ninth Circuit's unanimous decision in my favor. It is now case law in all states within the Ninth District that the use of prior salary cannot justify a wage differential between employees. My case is over, and the victorious ending is one I hope we all share. But the pursuit of justice continues. It takes all of us standing together, and every day we prove that the world is malleable, that change is possible. And I look forward to the day when we don't recognize Equal Pay Day. But this is not about me. I stand in place for the countless women who this has happened to. I know what it feels like to sit next to a man that takes more money home to his family when you do the exact same job. It's demeaning, it's heartbreaking, because if a woman can't be equal in the workplace, how can she be equal anywhere else? We can close the wage gap. It will take time, effort, and purposeful actions. I am grateful for what President Biden and his administration is doing to focus on the wage gap. I hope the light we shine on this issue today is so bright it cannot be ignored. There are no words to express just what an honor this is for me to share my story and to speak to the issue of equal pay. You have my commitment to continue advocacy work on behalf of the economic security of women and their families. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rocio Sáenz, International Executive Vice President of SEIU. On Equal Pay Day, I want to honor our essential women workers. Throughout the pandemic, women have served on the front lines. They reported for duty in childcare centers, neighbors' homes, nursing home, and hospital. These caregivers make all other work possible. They kept our economy going when everything else was shut down, often having to pay for their own personal protective equipment. And despite being at greater risk of dying from COVID, they didn't stop showing up to work. So when we talk about the gender pay gap, Let's make sure we are talking about all women, including Black, Latina, Asian Pacific Islander, immigrant, Indigenous women in essential jobs. Cents add up to dollars, and gender and racial pay gaps add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. Every worker deserves to be respected, protected, and paid regardless of what they do for a living.
Hi, I'm Billie Jean King, and I wish I could be with you in person today to discuss the important issue of pay equity on Equal Pay Day. My dream is that we celebrate Equal Pay Day every year on January 1, and women and men are paid equally. But that will most likely not happen in my lifetime, but it can happen in yours if we work together and if we stand together. It's now been almost 50 years since I defeated Bobby Riggs in the Battle of Sexes tennis match. Yet women in the U.S. who work full-time year-round are typically paid only 83 cents for every dollar paid to their male counterparts, with women of color making even less. And you can't truly understand inclusion until you have been excluded. We have narrowed the pay gap since 1973, but it is still not equal. That's why I'm here today supporting the White House Equal Pay Day Summit to remind us that without equal economic opportunity, true gender equality will remain out of reach for all of us. We have real work to do in the fight for women's rights and economic justice, and I'm grateful to partner with the White House to make Equal Pay Day a reality for all.
Please welcome back Vice President Kamala Harris, accompanied by current and former players from the United States women's national soccer team, Kelly O'Hara, Margaret Purse, Julie Foudy, Brianna Scurry, and Cindy Parlow Cone, who is also the current president of the United States Soccer Federation, and joining us virtually, Alex Morgan and Megan Rapino.
Welcome, everyone, to the White House. Welcome, welcome. As has been introduced, we are gathered together with really wonderful leaders. Obviously, you all have been champions in terms of your skill and your dominance in terms of women's soccer, but we are here today because you also have been leaders on an issue that affects most women and has affected most women in the workforce, and it's the issue of pay equity. So thank you for joining us at the White House for this important discussion, which really is going to center on your leadership, what you all have done, what you have accomplished, the challenges that you faced, both personally and professionally, in terms of getting us to this point where we have now seen extraordinary success because of your commitment to the issue and your willingness to be a voice for so many others on and off the field. So with that, I want to thank you all. And of course, we should mention that you have won 4 World Cup games and 4 Olympic golds. So absolutely. So Kelly, let's talk. I want to start with you. Because it's about being a player rep and the Players Association Union. And we still see that there are issues throughout the workforce around women being underpaid. But can you talk a bit about the fight that you all had and the role of the Players Association in reaching the settlement?
For sure. You know, I think a lot of people hear our fight for equal pay and they think compensation, which is definitely what it's about. But there are a lot of other things that we were fighting for. There was a lot of unequal treatment, and that came in the form of playing surfaces, travel standards, promotion and investment in the game. And Julie, we were actually talking before we got up here how far we've come even from when they were playing. And I don't know if you want to mention some things. Yeah, yes. But all that is to say, and to answer your question about the Players Association, we were facing all these things, and I think that the Players Association it's been around for generations, but we really reinvigorated it in 2017. And I think that dedicating time to setting it up in a way that we were able to achieve certain things allowed us to realize our collective voice and like the power of our unity. And I think without the Players Association, we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we've done in the past couple of years. And although we filed as individuals, not on behalf or with the Players Association, we were able to see it through because of that. And I'm really thankful that it did start so long ago, and these generations have put in the work. But we took the steps to create it the way we needed it, and it allowed us to get it over the line.
And the Players Association, it's a union.
Yes.
It's a players union.
Yeah.
And so that meant that you wouldn't have to, even though you filed as individuals in terms of the lawsuit, that in terms of your advocacy and the fight for equal pay, you knew that you weren't alone. You all were in it together.
For sure. I think that feeling that unity and recognizing how powerful we were, I think was a big reason why we were able to keep fighting, because it was not easy.
And so can you describe what the fight was, and maybe even just talk about what it was before, right?
Yeah.
The strengthening of the Players Association and the kind of collective
Yeah.
advocacy. What was it like before then?
Well, way back, Kelly and I were discussing, we were fighting for bagels, after training and having, everyone put in $5 so you can,
two training
yeah, you could get, bagels and cream cheese, or, hey, can we get a massage therapist, or hey, can we stay at maybe a little bit nicer hotel? I mean, just the basics that you start to hear about, and it festers a little bit more, and and the little things become bigger things. And so the thing that makes me so proud is this goes back to the 90s of us, threatening to actually strike an Olympics and not play in an Olympics, and locking out because we felt like that was our only leverage we had. And to see them, and one of the things we were so cognizant of is, okay, we've got to teach the younger kids what this fight is, so that when we're gone, they're going to carry that baton. And so when we, the old bags as we call ourselves, see them take it and really take it to a whole new level. We were fighting for equitable pay. They're fighting for equal pay, as they should be. Right. And it just warms your heart because it's not easy. It was incredibly courageous, and it took a ton of energy and time and focus, and they just were locked in on getting it done. And then you have a woman who's president of U.S. Soccer who can help them get it over the line. So it was a full circle moment for a lot of us, a proud moment.
So let's go to we were talking backstage about the inside-outside game, right? The advocacy from the outside. And then really most of the reforms and most of the advances that we've ever seen in terms of equality and the ongoing fight for equality has required the push from the outside, but it requires also allies at the very least on the inside, if not advocates on the inside also. So can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you as a former player, but then being the president, and what that meant in terms of the difficulties you must have experienced from the inside, understanding the push from the outside?
Yeah, for me, I feel like it has been over 2 decades of work. It started off, as Julia said, fighting for bagels between training sessions. And now this larger group of women through the last 2 decades are literally changing the world. Yeah. And for me, I'm also a coach, so to know that these young girls are now growing up and they can realize their dreams and they're going to be fairly compensated for that, I think that's why this is so important. It's not necessarily for the people sitting here today, but it's for the future of not only the future soccer players, but women in general. And I think that's why this is important. That's why leadership is important. And getting to your point is, I sat beside Jules and Bri when we were doing our CBA negotiations. And I don't think you can just sit on the outside and keep complaining unless you're willing to get inside and help create change. And so that is why I do what I do, because I think having people on the inside that understand the players and what it's like to be out on the field representing your country and what that means to you, I think is really important to create change. But as you said backstage, our work isn't done yet. we still have a lot of work to do, both in our sport and in our country and worldwide. In our sport, I know that I'm going to have willing partners in CONCACAF and FIFA to spread what we have done here to the rest of the world.
And you were just reelected president, right?
Yes.
Yes, you were. Fantastic. Do you mind sharing with us, without, you don't have to name names, but what were people in the inside saying about why this hadn't happened, or where there was resistance? How were they justifying that in their own minds, much less for the best interest of the game and to your point, what you represent, which is the United States of America?
Yeah, I think people in my boardroom come at it from different perspectives, so not everyone thinks the same thing. I think the challenges from a U.S. soccer standpoint was that there were two separate contracts for the men and the women, because the women wanted guaranteed pay, the men were pay to play, and so trying to find equal with totally different structures of contracts was forever elusive. That's why we're in CBA negotiations right now and trying to get to one structure so it's very clear that everything compensation-wise is equal. And then the other thing is the FIFA World Cup prize money is drastically different. The men's World Cup winner for the last World Cup got $38 million for winning it, whereas our women who won the World Cup only received $4 million from FIFA. So there are already built-in status quo differences that were systemic that we need to keep working to change.
What was the, maybe I'll go to Brianna, what was the inflection point? Like, what started to turn the movement and bring it to the next level?
I think what's important to note, when you get on the U.S. Women's National Team, you have a dual mandate. The first is superb soccer. I mean, we have the expectation of winning everything. And so if you think about it from that point of view, in our day, we were expected to win World Cups and Olympic Games. And then in present day, these amazing women had the same expectation, and we were both able to do that. So every cycle, we've won either the Olympic Games or the World Cup. And so there's that part of it. And the second part is to fight and raise the bar higher. And so I think for me, I've continued to talk about equal pay, even though I don't play anymore, and Julie does it. Now Cindy's obviously back in the arena in a different position, fighting for that as well. But I think for me, when I read about the team, and I consider them my team still, even though I haven't played with most of them. We all do. We all, yeah. My sisters, right? Your team too. When I saw that my team was essentially sticking their necks out there like we did with the boycott in '95, basically putting our Olympic dreams on the line. For me, I wanted to be an Olympian since I was 8. So putting my name out there to potentially lose my opportunity was very, very difficult, but very, very powerful, and we knew we had to do it. And I think when I saw that they filed that lawsuit, I thought it was so brave, so incredibly brave. And it was the next evolution of the battle to be able to get U.S. soccer to take us more seriously.
What was the risk that they took when they filed that lawsuit? Knowing it hadn't been done before, right?
Yeah.
What was the risk?
So when you file a lawsuit, in my opinion, you have your name on the dotted line of a legal document. And so there's that pressure and that connotation going along with that. And then to still have to try and win stuff, to go out there and play hard all the time that to win stuff, to win a World Cup, to win gold medals. That's the expectation. Even though you have this high level of time and energy, as everybody can attest to, pouring into something else, it almost like diverts from the goal, which should only be to win, not to do all these other things. And so I think having your name on a legal document, there's all this extra effort and, paying for lawyers and getting prepared and having maybe a potential trial or whatever it is, all that extra effort, I think, is the thing that's so different with the lawsuit versus maybe other ways to do it.
I think that's such an excellent point. As a general matter, when women are fighting for pay equity in any industry or in any employment setting, to require that the way that she will actually achieve parity in pay based on the value of work to require that would take a lawsuit, the intervention of a court, the rule of law, means that she's got to do her job every day, whatever that job is, and whatever that industry is, and deal with a lawsuit. And all that requires in terms of the time spent, but to your point, the vulnerability to put your name on a legal document and then put yourself in a court setting that is adversarial in nature, all because you want to get paid equal pay for equal work. And what that requires of that woman, beyond doing a good job, to your point, I think that's it's a subtle but incredibly important point. You were still striving for and achieving excellence in your job. And then it required superhuman excellence to endure litigation, to just get paid for the value of your work. Talk to me about the next generation and let's talk about that. We were talking backstage about how I shared, my mother had many sayings. One of them, she would say to me, Kamala, you may be the first to do many things, make sure you're not the last. And what I love about the conversation that we were happening, and then I'm gonna bring Megan and Alex into this conversation, but I love how you all really do think about this in terms of the generational impact. Those who kind of had to go with the machete and go and try and knock things down to achieve fairness, and then the next generation that has come through really appreciating that and then carrying it through and continuing with that work. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
100%. When you use the analogy of the machete, I was just thinking, I think that's so accurate. You guys had the machete, you have a sword, and now I feel like I have these like scissors that I'm like, all right, they're sharp, but like, let's trim, like, let's get it done. I really do think that the true power of this team doesn't come from the fact that we're able to accomplish change, but we're able to embolden others to pursue change. Yeah. It's so evident that this progress is the result of women across generations. Yeah. And I think that's a lesson in possibility. It shows that when you pursue what is right, others will join you, and it will continue on past whatever you can imagine it's going to do. So yeah, I mean, I even think, I'm not the youngest player in camp. And even when I look younger than me, I'm like, yeah, they're gonna be great. It's on both sides of the coin, on the field and off the field. So I do agree, the future is bright, and I'm really grateful to have had examples like this, not just seeing it on television, but then practicing with it every day, being able to call it. I'm talking to Pino after camp and see what's going on. It's incredible, the culture that you guys have created, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of it.
And I love that point. If we see it for what we should, which is that it's really a fight for something, not against something. And yes, about equal pay and equity, but also possibility, right? And encouraging people to see what is possible, even if it has never been. Megan? Coming to you. Talk a little bit about where you think that there are lessons for women in other industries and professions based on the experience that you all have had. What worked, what didn't work? How can you advise others about where maybe there's some hard knocks, but where it was worth it because you saw some success? Oh. It's the theme of the last 2 years.
I mean,
Take two.
that just really, okay, I deserve that. I was gonna say, I'm not gonna pass up this opportunity, certainly the first time in my life and the first time ever, hopefully not the last, to just say, Madam Vice President, like, that's incredible. And although it doesn't have to specifically do with equal pay, I think it speaks to a changing landscape that we're all part of. And I think the thing that it's really settled with me is that our freedom and our liberation, our equality is tied up in each other in the moment, but also generationally. I mean, you're seeing on the stage right now, Madam Vice President, your mom, her famous quote about not being The last one, Even Though You're the First, when we think of Billie Jean King and Venus and Serena Williams and WNBA players, obviously my partner Sue Bird and Nneka Ogwumike, like all of these women are doing the same thing. And then even go wider. If I'm seeing myself in, union workers in Alabama and they're seeing themselves in us or our team, it's all kind of the same thing because we're all dealing with the same issues. So I think for us, the more we connect our stories, the more we literally connect with each other, the more that we can kind of draft off each other, I think the more successful that will be. And I know for us, our lawsuit, it doesn't capture every single player and it doesn't capture every single woman in all of America, but it is something and it's our little part. And I think when you start to string together the idea that all of our equality, I mean, frankly, across the entire spectrum of equality, but all of our liberation, all of our freedom, all of our worth is tied up in each other. Now we have a movement. Now we have 50% of the country all fighting for the same thing. And then, of course, you add, allies and advocates and people who believe and feel the same thing. And that's where I think the biggest impact can come, because as you say, the little knocks, I mean, everything's a knock, like inequalities in the air that we breathe. And so it is difficult at times. And Kelly spoke to it, being able to sign your name with 27 other people and being able to at times take a rest when you're exhausted, knowing that, other women or other players or other people in your union are having your back and doing that work, I think is essential, because it is difficult work and it is long work and the game has to be long. So I think for all of us, we sort of know it on the team just intrinsically, because we know that we come from a long line of fighters and women who fought for equality and fought for freedoms for us and fought to make things better each generation. I think that's our goal. And now really trying to tie it to a larger sort of society movement is what I think will have the most impact over the shortest amount of time.
Well, that's great. And that's right. And that's about the coalition. And I think the strength of coalition always is seeing the commonalities and then building and growing off of that in a way that empowers everybody. I think that's right. Alex, did you just get off the field?
I'm very underdressed. I literally ran in, my cleats are still on. So, yes.
I know that, and I'm so glad that, because we weren't sure, and you hustled to get here, and I'm so glad. And I'm thinking, given the circumstances in which you are here, that it might be best to ask you, what are the analogies between the fight for equal pay and the fight to win a game?
Oh.
Like, what does it take? What does it take? Give me some analogies, like, right? The rules of winning a game.
I mean, it takes everything. Honestly, I feel like it's everything. Like Pino said, sometimes you have some women stepping up and some have to take a back seat because they're exhausted. So it's everyone fighting for each other. It's working as a team. It's supporting each other. It's raising questions and knowing in your heart that you're doing the right thing, and it's leaning on each other. A fight for equal pay is a lot longer than a soccer game and a lot harder, but there's definitely some similarities to be had.
And good coaches, I imagine, help, right?
Definitely coaches, lawyers,
fair umpires, right?
Yes.
Referees, all that. Yeah.
Oh, it all plays into referees, judges, court decisions.
Yeah.
Yep, it all plays into it.
That was good off the fly, right? I knew there would be some. I mean, it's because also it really is about pacing yourself, for sure, and figuring out how do you define the win, right? And the score is certainly one, but I think that on this point, and to Megan's point, anything that's about a fight for equality, the win includes that you fought. That's part of defining the win, that you stood up for yourself, right? Even when the odds were against you, maybe it wasn't popular, because in these kinds of processes, we were talking about the fact I was in Selma last week. commemorating the 57th anniversary of the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, when those marchers, you know, they tried 3 times to cross that bridge and were beaten back, you know, shed blood on that bridge, but they didn't give up. And every time they went, they were inspiring other people to know what was possible. And that's, you know, it's a similar thing, to have that kind of faith in yourself and your cause and to not give up. And you all have done that in a really extraordinary way. In a really extraordinary way. So thank you all very much. It's wonderful to watch. And I know many of us watched it from afar, saw the images of, you know, the difference in terms of locker rooms and the equipment in terms of, yeah. And it's good to know that things are changing for the better. So thank you all very much for all of us who are here and all of us who are watching, and the folks you probably never meet who are going to benefit from the work that you all did. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. Yay!
Thank you for having me at the Equal Pay Day Virtual Summit. I've spent a good portion of my career looking at disparities in economic opportunity, especially for women. As you all know, the average woman in the U.S. who works full-time year-round is paid only 83 cents for every dollar paid to a man. Even when we compare the gender gap across workers in similar occupations with comparable qualifications, there's still a gap of about 10%. These disparities in pay only widen for women of color. Why does this happen? Well, much of it is structural. As people progress in their careers, jobs can require longer hours and penalize individuals with caretaking responsibilities. This has a disproportionate effect on women, who often bear a larger share of the childcare burden. In turn, at higher rates than men, women have to leave the workforce, take on jobs with unpredictable schedules, and work fewer hours. These factors are relevant across the wage spectrum, including among the highest paid jobs in the labor market. Although women now enter professional schools at an almost equal rate to men, they're still substantially less likely to reach the top of their professions. Take the legal profession. Women make up 47% of students at top 50 law schools, but just 17% of equity partners at the nation's top law firms. I've experienced these pressures firsthand when I was a new mother and trying to balance childcare with my teaching responsibilities. I was fortunate that I had a very good babysitter back then. My husband and I could afford one, and that enabled me to continue working. But I know that's not really the norm for most American women. And because of this, our country suffers. And some research suggests that if women received a fair paycheck, poverty for working women would be reduced by half. Research has shown that fewer women in the labor market cost the economy hundreds of billions each year. Bringing more women into the workforce and paying them a fair wage not only helps families, it helps our entire economy. For example, one study estimated that increasing the female labor force participation rate to the male participation rate would raise our gross domestic product by 5%. On a positive note, we've already seen firsthand how gender equality in the workforce over the past few decades has resulted in substantial benefits to America's economy. To take one important example, as noted in the 2015 Economic Report of the President, almost all of the middle-class income gains over the past half-century can be attributed to increased wages earned by women. Yet, no matter the progress, We're here today because stubborn gaps remain. Our administration's economic agenda tries to address this by reducing the cost of childcare, providing families more access to home care for a loved one who falls ill, and offering paid leave to workers. The pro-family programs in both what we've already implemented, like the American Rescue Plan, and our proposals before Congress will break down barriers to employment, bring more women into the workforce, and help fix long-standing inequities. We know, though, that what we've done is just a start. My question for those participating today is, how can we at Treasury help? What else can we do to address inequities in pay and beyond? I'm eager to work with you to address these questions in the months ahead.
I'm Miran Algorri. I'm the owner of Little Blossoms Childcare in Chula Vista, California. I'm also a member of Childcare Providers United, AFSCME UDW, and I have been a family childcare provider for over 24 years. Equal Pay Day is important to me because we need to address the gender pay gap and ensure society demonstrates the value of the essential work women do. Childcare providers like me need access to fair pay. Providers like me ensure that people, especially women, can participate in the workforce. We know that cents add up to dollars, and persistent gender and racial pay gaps add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. The vast majority of childcare providers like me are women, and women of color in particular. By investing in childcare and providers, we can ensure that our country truly values the work that women provide. By expanding access to childcare, we can boost women's wages and support American families.
Welcome back. I am Brian Deese. I'm the director of the National Economic Council, and I am thrilled to be continuing this conversation today on Equal Pay Day with two leaders, corporate leaders, who need very little introduction in terms of their leadership on all issues related to gender equality and equal pay. But we're going to have a conversation here about how leaders in the corporate sector, leaders of private businesses in the United States, are approaching this issue and trying to get practical about both what you have learned and also what challenges lie ahead and how policy could help or hinder your efforts to be leading in the private sector. So I'm thrilled today to be here with Mark Benioff, who is the co-CEO and co-founder of Salesforce. And Mark is not only one of the nation's leading innovators in technology for decades, but in fact has been leading on this issue of gender equity for years as well. Really glad to have you here and looking forward to your perspective. And likewise, Sonia Singhal, who is the CEO of Gap, which is a portfolio that includes Old Navy, Gap, Banana Republic, Athleta. And she has not only a breadth of experience in retail and apparel, but is leading a company of more than 100,000 employees, the significant majority of which, as I understand, are women. And so we have two really expert perspectives here, so I'm really looking forward to getting into it right here. So I want to start, Mark, with you, and give us your perspective. I know that this issue of gender discrimination and equal pay have been places where you've led early. I saw just today you announced $4 million invested in equal pay this year, $16 million over the course of the last 5 years. What has it taken from a practical perspective to orient your company toward trying to be a leader in this space?
Well, Brian, what a pleasure it is to be with you, and thank you. And so happy to be here with Sonia as well. You know, we're here very much on the shoulders of giants. We've heard from the women's soccer team. We can't forget the incredible visionary leadership of Lily Ledbetter, who got us here, as well as Billie Jean King, as well as Patty Arquette. But also we're here because of the hundreds of millions of women who are paid less than men for equal work. So how do we pay men and women equally for equal work? There's no finish line when it comes to equality. This year, as you said, we just made a $4 million adjustment to our pay scales. We've made a $15 million adjustment over the last 7 years. The reason why this year is such a large year is because we had a major acquisition. And whenever we make a major acquisition, all of our pay scales have to be reset again. It's something that we've learned. We thought this was a one-time event, but equal pay is actually a process in a company. It's something that you commit to, and that every year you have to then audit your pay scales as you go forward. It's not something they taught me in business school. I don't think it's something that they teach anyone, but it's something that we need to teach everyone.
So I want to pick up on this issue of audits that you raised, because Sonia, I know that you were one of the first Fortune 500 companies to institute an audit, and it sounds simple, institute equal pay across a workforce, but in practice, the audit, independent review, constant updating approach that Mark is talking about is necessary. Can you help explain a little bit why it's necessary and how you actually how you go after achieving that objective and then updating that objective across time?
No, happy to, and pleasure to be here. Hello, Mark, good to see you. And great to see your leadership in this topic as well. Look, I think pay equity at every level does not happen by accident. And for us, it was the same. Luckily, we had a wonderful legacy. You know, this company was founded 53 years ago by a husband-wife team, Don and Doris Fisher. They each put in $23,000 of their respective money to start the company back in 1969. So we had a great legacy to build on. But in 2014, we wanted to be sure. And we wanted to be sure that, in fact, for our over 100,000 employees, and those employees, 76% female, that we, in fact, were living up to our legacy and living up to the values of this great company. So we brought in outside help, and we had them audit what we thought we knew, but we wanted to validate, was that we, in fact, did pay equally for every job at every level in every geography. And so at that time, we became the first Fortune 500 company to be validated as paying equally between men and women. And this is equally important to the men in our company as much as the women in the company. Employees today want to work for a values-driven company, and this is a great example of that. So from that time in 2014 where we audited, we have instituted that process in our annual methods, and we've created transparency, and we're data-driven in this way. And anytime we see discrepancies, we make the adjustments. And so, what I would say is that any CEO can decide to do this. Any company can make this choice. And you have two examples here where it's happening. And I would offer these four areas to focus on if you want to actually make this change. One is you have to look at your data. You have to look at the actual data and have third-party objectivity. And then you have to actually make the adjustments based on what the information tells you. You have to be willing to make that move. And so that's step number one for any company. Step number two is, how do you remove unconscious bias, in your practices? And again, there's employee methods, there's management methods that you can deploy to institutionalize this, but leaving it up to chance is a risk. So that's important. Third, have a culture that enables mentorship and enables sponsorship, and have that be the norm. And then fourth, I think continuing to ensure that you're driving a culture of performance, because when you have equality and performance, that's when companies win and manage all stakeholders. So, I think there's approaches that there's a playbook that can be followed, and really proud of, our legacy, but also the daily management of ensuring that we stay, leading on this topic.
Thank you for that, Sonia. And the message that anybody can do this is a really important one today. So thank you for that. Mark, I want to pivot to the question of broaden out a little bit in terms of compensation beyond pay and also the pandemic. I mean, one of the things that I think this pandemic has disrupted is how we think about work, how we think about what's important in terms of norms, where we work, how it affects and interacts with our lives. And of course, economically, one of the things that has held back this recovery is people who want to get back into the workforce but can't because the pandemic has affected their their childcare situation, their family situation. And so I'm just curious your perspective as a corporate leader and an employer, how you think about the broadening from pay to compensation and the intersection between what you think your employees need to actually have equal opportunity to not just be paid, but to move up and compete for jobs.
Well, Brian, you're right. Equality means more than just pay. It can mean many things. And when we look at the broader thoughts about equality, it could be everything from LGBTQ equality to racial equality, but even the ability to come to work. What does it mean? And I think in the pandemic, what we've seen is that not everyone is on an equal playing field. And the pandemic is a moment where we all have to look at what does that mean. First, I think we have to look at mental health. 37% of our employees have reported mental health issues during the pandemic. That's much more significant than anything we've ever seen before. Also, we've seen in the areas of equality, the ability for everyone to participate in a digital environment like Sonia is doing us right now. Well, that isn't true for everyone. Not everyone can do that. And now, as we all try to return back to work, well, things have changed for a lot of people. You could think about how blue-collar workers are thinking about coming back to work is going to be different than traditional information workers. This is a major obstacle. How are we going to overcome this? So this is a moment where CEOs really have to look at how are we creating a new type of work environment. The past is gone. Now we're coming back into a new work environment. We don't expect all of our workers to come back to the office. We don't expect all of our workers to basically have the same kind of work environment that they had just 2 years ago. So we're creating a new type of work environment, a place where we can have equality for all.
It's a challenge, but exciting, the opportunity embedded there as well. Sonia, I wanted to pick up on something you said about this being something that was important for all of your employees, all of your workforce, not just women, because of the desire to work for a values-driven company. And I'd love you to just have you elaborate on that a little bit about how you use your principles and the values and the tools you're talking about as a recruitment and retention tool, what you hear from the workforce around what is important with respect to equality, and where you are thinking about taking this forward in terms of continuing to make your company a place where people, particularly young people, want to come and work.
No, thanks. And it's one of my favorite topics. I do think it's our biggest differentiator as a company. You know, in what we've learned the last few years and the transparency that exists now for customers, employees to know the truth, right? And to really seek out what is real about values-driven companies and what is not real. You know, we and I believe that our culture and core values is a primary differentiator for both attracting talent and retaining talent. I hear this all the time. And we have, you know, one of the most diverse workforces out there. We have hourly workers in our stores, you know, single moms that are working multiple jobs. We've got distribution center employees. We have engineers. We've got thousands of engineers and technologists. We have artists and designers. We have global employees across the world in many countries. And what I will tell you, they all say is that the 53-year legacy of values and being inclusive and continuing to push ourselves to be relevant with the changing culture and the changing values of America has been what has attracted them and kept them here. And people want to work for fair companies. They want to work for companies that reflect what they know is right and good. And I think our customers also care deeply, right? And you know, whether it's pay equity, which we're talking about today, or other aspects of inclusion, you know, I think this is something that we care deeply about. I think it shows up in our brands. It shows up in front of the customer because our employees believe it, and they show up every day to work to improve it. So in an environment where, you know, it is a time of reckoning in terms of employee satisfaction, the Great Resignation you've heard about, values-driven companies are the ones that I think will really make it and win in the next chapter. So we believe it's a differentiator, but it takes work every single day to continue to make progress. And so every day, every year, we're looking for how we can improve. And we have a lot of areas where we are focused on improving as well.
It's turning the conversation from how much it costs to get to do things like pay equity to the the economic benefits to your company, let alone the economy as a whole. It's a really important pivot. So I could keep this conversation going for a long time. It's super fascinating, lots of places to go. But we're going to have to cut off. So I want to ask each of you a lightning round last question, which is for everybody who is out here watching this and getting to see the women's soccer team, getting to see the vice president, getting to see both of you all leading path breakers in your respective fields. What is the one message to those who are out there and wanting to ask themselves, what can I do on this Equal Pay Day to try to make a difference? Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, this year, Salesforce is going to do more than $32 billion in revenue. We just delivered a 27% growth quarter, and we have more than 75,000 employees. So as we march into the Fortune 100, I'm very proud that we do that with equal pay scales. And that's a decision that we made now more than 7 years ago, which was to do it. Every company, Sonia, my company, we have human resource systems. These aren't new. We know who our employees are and how much we pay them and where they live. Everybody knows that. So it doesn't take very much work to do that kind of query or that kind of ask the question of the data. Well, are men and women paid equally for equal work? But it does require you to ask that question. I think a lot of CEOs still remain very much afraid. I remember that moment when my executives came to me and said, we want you to ask the question. I remember very well. It was over a lunch. And two of my most senior female executives said, we think we're not paying men and women equally for equal work. I didn't think it was true, but it was. And I wondered at that point, what is this really going to cost the company? And I think for many CEOs, they have to make that leap. As I said, they're not taught this in business school. They didn't get their degree based on knowing about equality for all or gender equality. They may not have ever heard the term. But now CEOs have to make that leap. They have to ask the question. They have to get through that fear. And that's the number one thing every CEO can do. And I'm sure that Sonia will agree that those big challenges in business, those are the scariest ones, where you don't really know what's over that next hill. But in this case of gender equality, we have no choice. We have no choice. We have to ask the question so that we can get to that next level. And I'm so glad that Salesforce did. And I'm so grateful to those female executives who encouraged me to do that now 7 years ago.
That's fantastic. Sonia, what's your one message to everybody out there who's listening right now?
Look, I think that everyone has a choice, right? You have a choice where you want to work. You have a choice where you want to shop, what products and services, companies you want to be in business with. And everyone has that power of choice to choose along with the right values. And as Mark said, leaders have a choice to make a change or not. And when you're leading at the top of the company like Mark is, or I have the opportunity to do, you have to make the right choices. And I'd say that it's a call to action for everyone. Your choices can reflect the values that you care about. Equality is as foundational as America is. I mean, it's a core value in America. And so I'd say that we all have the choice of our decisions, where we want to work, how we want to spend our money, and how we want to lead. And so it's a personal commitment to that. And so I would encourage everyone to be thoughtful about their personal decisions and make the right choices that align to your values. And that's how you can really drive change.
Well, Mark, Sonia, I want to thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your partnership with this administration on issues large and small as we drive this economic recovery forward. And I think that's an appropriate way to end. Let's ask the question, as Mark said, and make the choice, as Sonia said, and make equal pay and equality a reality in our modern American economy. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Today, I join members of the Biden-Harris administration in marking Equal Pay Day. Last year on Equal Pay Day, I met with a group of women in St. Louis, Missouri. I heard about their experiences in the workforce. I especially heard about the challenges they faced over the course of their careers. I remember hearing from a woman who previously worked at our city hall and a nonprofit organization. When her daughter-in-law was diagnosed with a serious illness, she left her job to become a home care worker. She told me how much she loved the work, but did not feel her efforts were adequately valued in the workplace. I've heard similar stories as I've traveled to over 30 states this past year as Second Gentleman. It's the same, whether in office spaces, in a construction zone, or taking care of family members at home. So let us be very clear. Women carry a heavy load and they must be compensated fairly. When we talk about equal pay, it's imperative that we make clear what a tremendous impact this disparity has on women and their families. Cents add up to dollars, and persistent pay gaps add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. Now, equal pay is not just a woman's issue. It's an issue for the entire economy. When women aren't compensated fairly, it impacts their family's economic security and their future prospects. Addressing gender and racial wage gaps is even more critical in the wake of COVID-19, which, as we all know, disproportionately affects women. Millions of women reduced their hours or left their jobs entirely in order to meet the needs of their families. So today, we issue a call to action to leaders everywhere, especially leaders who are men, to address the long-standing inequities in pay that impact not only women, but families, communities. This is not only a matter of economic competitiveness, it's an issue of fairness, and one that matters to me greatly as a father. It's an issue equally important, not only for our daughter, but also our son. Today and every day, we must keep fighting to level the gender pay gap so that all people, regardless of gender, have a chance to reach their potential. Thank you for coming together today to discuss this important issue and for all you're doing and will continue to do to achieve progress.
Hello, my name is Lily Ledbetter, and I, like so many women in this country and around the world, have my own equal pay story. In 1979, I took a job at Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company in Gadsden, Alabama. I was the only woman with my job, and though I began my career with equal pay, I sure as heck didn't end it that way. When I found out how much less I'd been paid compared to the men in my job, I was so hurt and angry. So I filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and later a lawsuit. Initially, a jury sided with me and awarded me compensation, but my employer appealed the decision all the way to the Supreme Court. In 2007, the Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision that employers cannot be sued under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act if the claims are based on decisions made by the employer 180 days ago or more. That's discrimination. That devaluing of my work was allowed to hold on a technicality. But I didn't give up. I kept fighting, and finally in 2009, President Obama signed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act into law to correct that Supreme Court decision and make sure that each discriminatory paycheck resets the 180-day clock to file a claim, instead of only being able to challenge the discrimination soon after the original pay decision was made. But that law didn't solve everything. More technicalities continue to run rampant, and discrimination against women, especially women of color, is still woven into the fabric of our society and our workplaces. And all this was made worse with the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic exposed the devastating economic reality of low-paid women workers who were on the front lines of the crisis. Those women face a cruel double whammy. They're getting hit by the economic tsunami of the pandemic, along with the lost earnings of the gender wage gap that pays them less than men doing the same job. When we compare all women to all men, women working full-time year-round in 2020 We're typically paid just 83 cents for every dollar paid to men. But so many women, in particular women of color and low-paid workers, lost jobs during the pandemic. When we compare all women workers with all men workers, regardless of how many hours or weeks they worked, women were typically paid only 73 cents for every dollar paid to men, with some women of color paid significantly less. Imagine if the balance of those lost wages, money they deserve in a just society, were available to them now. It could help a child care worker, waitress, healthcare aide, and so many other low-paid workers put food on the table, pay for medication and other healthcare needs, or cover rent and avoid eviction. Even in the best of times, most women in the low-paid workforce have always lived on a razor's edge. A child gets sick, a car breaks down, childcare falls through, hours are cut. It doesn't take a pandemic to kick so many women and families into economic ruin. But maybe it takes a pandemic for the rest of the country to take notice. It is beyond pastime for us to take notice and for our elected officials to take action. I'm grateful to President Biden for his plan to build back better, and I'm hopeful that our elected officials will stop debating over people's lives. People, especially women, literally can't afford to wait one more minute for this agenda to pass. Thank you.
We have a lot of work to do, but as you've heard from the Vice President and all of our guests today we're making progress. Thank you all for joining us for the White House Equal Pay Day Summit and for your partnership today and every day.